You've landed at the edge of what medicine has known and what it's becoming. I'm Dr. Richard Rocker, and this is the Integrative Continuum, a podcast bridging biology, energy, and human potential. In each episode, we explore how quantum biology, frequency medicine, and ancient healing systems are transforming our understanding of health. This is where mitochondria meet meaning and blood work meets bioenergetics. Subscribe now and join me on the frontier of integrative healing, where science and soul are no longer separate. Welcome to the Integrative Continuum Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Rocker. My work sits at the intersection of functional, integrative, and natural medicine, where we explore the science, philosophy, and practical applications of healthcare that look beyond symptoms and toward deeper root causes of disease. On this podcast, I have conversations with clinicians, researchers, and thought leaders from around the world who are helping shape the future of medicine. Our goal is to explore ideas that sit across the continuum of health, from conventional medicine to integrative approaches and everything in between. One thing I always say to listeners is that I approach this work based on the truth as I know it and as I learn it. Medicine and science are constantly evolving, and none of us have all the answers. What we can do is continue asking questions, examining the evidence, and learning together as our understanding grows. Today's guest is someone whose work sits right at the intersection of science, sustainability, and the future of health systems. Dr. Rob Verkerk is an internationally recognized multidisciplinary scientist with more than 4 decades of experience spanning health, agriculture, and environmental sustainability across academia, the nonprofit sector, and consultancy. He holds a master and PhD degrees from Imperial College London, where he also completed 7 years of postdoctoral research. His work focuses on applying ecological and regenerative principles to health, recognizing the deep connection between human well-being and planetary health. In 2002, Dr. Verkerk founded the Alliance for Natural Health International, a global non-profit organization dedicated to protecting and promoting sustainable healthcare systems and access to natural health approaches. He currently serves as the executive and scientific director of both ANH International and ANH USA, where he has played a leading role in research advocacy and the regulatory landscape surrounding natural healthcare and nutrition. Dr. Verkerk is the author of more than 60 scientific papers, a fellow of both the American College of Nutrition and the Royal Society of Medicine, a member of the International College for Integrative Medicine, and scientific lead for the UK-based integrative cancer care charity Yes to Life. In today's conversation, we explore the evolving regulatory landscape around natural health and nutrition, the relationship between environmental sustainability and human health, and what the future of integrative medicine might look like in a rapidly changing healthcare system. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Rob Verkerk to the Integrative Continuum Podcast. Welcome, Dr. Rob.
Richard, absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you very much. Just a real pleasure to have you here. I was just thinking, when I met you first, it was about 2 years ago. We were at a functional medicine annual conference here in Ireland, and you were speaking along with one of my other mentors, Dr. Leo Priumvum, and you guys were the highlight of the 2 days there. So it's a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful to be with you.
Great. So Rob, your work spans agriculture, sustainability, environmental science, and health policy. So what led you to found the Alliance for Natural Health and start focusing on the regulation of natural health products?
I think that really the big driver was my recognition as a postdoc research fellow at Imperial College that what we weren't lacking is information on how to solve some of the world's major problems, whether it was producing enough wholesome food to be able to support 8 billion plus people, whether it was how to do healthcare. What we had is a lack of resolve in terms of the politics, the economics, the social change. The information was there, and we weren't going to solve the problems by continuing to put new research papers on shelves. And for me, I got to the stage in my career where I was offered permanent tenure at Imperial College, and I had to make a decision. Did I want to spend the rest of my life as an academic adding more journals to already a rather full list of journals that a small segment of the population end up reading? Or did I want to engage with the politics of health? And of course, the politics of health is a huge subject in its own right, but it does look at the way in which power and control is vested in a small number of organizations and governments, and it delivers a kind of healthcare system or a food system that benefits those few and really is to the detriment of most of us. So I really decided to take a huge risk, personal risk, which is to set up a non-profit from scratch. Most of my family thought I'd lost my marbles. And, I had young children at the time, and it was a pretty crazy thing to do, but there was a very deep calling to engage with this. And that's what I've been doing for the last 25 years now.
Excellent. So for the listeners who may not be familiar with the Alliance for Natural Health, so what is the organization trying to achieve? Why was it necessary to create it in the first place?
Well, we at the time, the concept of natural health, when we set up Alliance for Natural Health, the concept of natural health hadn't really caught on. It wasn't a very widely known concept, despite the fact there were plenty of people engaged in natural health, and there was a concept referred to as health freedom that had become very big in the United States of America. And health freedom basically is ensuring freedom of choice in healthcare. But it doesn't necessarily relate just to those things that are natural. It also relates to your free choice to be able to, use generic drugs rather than patented drugs. It might refer to your ability to choose to use, stem cell therapy versus taking oral pharmaceuticals. So there's many areas in which it wasn't specifically related to natural health. My own background as an ecologist by original training was really, and this is where Leo Pronbaum and I have, run parallel tracks over the 4 decades of our respective experiences, that we have to look at human evolutionary background to see that we are so exquisitely involved, have been involved with nature, from the get-go. And when you look at how, say, regulators are now, we had last year the heads of agencies in Europe all agreeing that there were 114 botanical compounds that are some of the most important botanical compounds used not only in herbal medicine, but in functional medicine and integrative medicine. These things all needed to be banned because they were inherently toxic. They all had the capacity to, for example, be hepatotoxins. So we need to get rid of them. And this is how you kind of impose the precautionary principle that was a phenomenal idea when it first came into environmental protection. If you want to protect, polar bears in the Arctic, it's a great idea. If you want to use it to try and remove botanicals from the human food supply, it's a particularly bad idea, because if you have essentially the precautionary principle says, in the event of uncertainty, you take the measure that is most sure to prevent exposure. So it's fine when it comes to an environmental toxin. But the thing is, with a lot of the natural compounds with which we have co-evolved, most of them we have a hormetic relationship with. They act as hormetins. So you can take turmeric, you can take resveratrol, green tea extracts, these things that we recognize as being very healthful when taken in the right amount. All of them can have catastrophic effects on health if we take too much of it. So there isn't a straight line, linear relationship in terms of dose response. There's often a U-shaped or a J-shaped relationship in which low-level exposures to which we've had evolutionary exposure and adaptation engender a stimulatory or beneficial effect, and only in high doses do they create an inhibitory or toxic effect on the body. And these are concepts these regulators cannot seem to get their heads around, and they just go, let's ban the lot, because they've got pharma leaning on them, saying, guys, these things are now beginning to compete with our mainstream drugs. You know, what mechanism can we use to pull it off the shelves and get it out of the hands of practitioners? So you see, as soon as you start looking at that lens where you bring in evolution and toxicology and ecology, plus regulation, you have to apply a multidisciplinary lens. And so I figured that my background had something to offer in this area because I'd been involved in environmental campaigns throughout many years of environmental activism in Australia, and we'd got a whole bunch of environmental toxins off the market. And now I was back in Europe as an academic being invited into this space. Even while I was at Imperial College, I was one of the things that I'd gone very public on was the impact of dietary simplification through the globalization of the food supply. You know, essentially, we have narrowed down the number of, grasses, we call them cereals, the number of grasses, the number of vegetables, the number of fruits, the number of fungi, mushrooms, that we eat massively. And we now tend to eat the same ones that are often very different from even the ones that our grandparents consumed. So, if we look at the kind of broccoli floret that our grandparents or great-grandparents consumed, not only was it genetically different, and the whole, if we look at the glucosinolates and all the sulfur-based compounds that are in there that have cancer protective properties, I mean, these very compounds act as pesticides in the plant. So of course they have toxicity because that's how they control insects and fungi in the plant. But the varieties that our grandparents consumed had high levels of these things, but they're all bitter. So the plant breeders come along and go, hey, we know how to get people to eat more green veg. We'll just breed these things out and produce less of them. So as our palates become dumber and dumber and more, accustomed to a McDonald type flavor, we have children growing up in this world who resist, bitter and sour flavors that deliver a huge number of phytochemicals that have massively beneficial properties. And so, in a way, I would argue that the evolutionary response to this is you, Richard, people like you who come along and say, we have something to offer in healthcare where we're going to start delivering some of the substances that you're no longer getting. We're going to deliver some of the behavior changes in terms of physical activity that you're no longer getting because you're sitting 14 hours a day stuck in front of a computer. So the maladaptation to our environment is such a huge problem. But yes, in essence, it's time to review the whole process of where we are in terms of our health and the rise of chronic and degenerative diseases in relation to our adaptation or otherwise to our current environment. And once we do that, we need to reappraise the entire political system and regulatory system in which these systems exist. And that's why natural health has been kicked out to the boundaries of healthcare, viewed as being pseudo-scientific and, conspiracy theory and not enough evidence. And I mean, you know, look at if you do look at the evidence base, I mean, it's remarkable just how much evidence there is, but they can keep on calling out that there's insufficient evidence. And, if that's fed into the mainstream media and piped through people's computers and into their television screens and into their newspapers, they start believing it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, geez, you just summed up there in the last couple of minutes a lot of the work that I do in my clinic with patients. And now the bitter and sour foods, I must be one of the only weirdos out there. I love bitter and sour foods.
Yeah.
I actually crave them. And
Me
thankfully,
too.
now that I know what I know and what you said, I'm going, well, maybe this is a reason why my health is, much better than, others at my age and so forth. But I think
You're not
the
doing
part,
bad for 25.
uh, I put a few more on there, but anyways, I think the further we get away from nature, the more issues and problems that we have, and we can really see that this is happening in society right now. And you explained that so nicely. Part of what I do with my patients is I show them a chart, the biochemical composition of the human body, and it's in its kind of its rough form, but we show them what it's all composed of. And I say, well, you should be trying to eat as close to this as you can. Don't worry about the 10,000 different diet types out there. Let's stick with this. And anytime that you eat outside of that range, I say, I guarantee you something is going to go wrong, right?
Mm,
And then
mm.
when you look at all the frankly nasty arguments that are out there between different diet types out there, and I go, wait a second. Why don't we look at this at a biochemical basis and see what actually makes sense here, and then apply that accordingly? And in my experience, that's always worked extremely well. So,
Exactly. And that's still, biochemistry is still only a single lens. Try
yeah,
looking at it through an electromagnetic lens.
there we
And
go. Yeah,
and 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 once we look at the way in which the chemical structures, the molecular shapes, and their respective resonances are altered by modern food processing techniques. I mean, people still have a very limited view on why is ultra processed food so bad? Well, you've got it occurs at so many levels. At one level is the mechanical processing. Jenny Brand Miller from Sydney University, whose website glycemicindex.com is the biggest single repository of information on the glycemic index and glycemic load of different foods. She shows that modern day so-called whole grain cereal that is given to children as the healthy option responds in terms of glycemic load in the body, conversion to blood sugar, just as quickly as those super ultra processed Rice Krispies and the rest of them,
yeah,
because you've chopped up mechanically those carbohydrate chains to such small pieces, the body goes, wow, we can convert that to sugar real quick. Whereas if it has long chains of carbohydrates, the amylase and will take much longer to break it down. So, so you've got mechanical processing. Then we've got the biochemistry that you talk to. But we also know that every single molecule has an electromagnetic signature. And when we look at combinations of molecules, food is extraordinarily complex. A single tomato or tomato, as you might call it, has over 1,000 discrete compounds within it. And, one of the reasons that a beautiful sun-ripened, vine-ripened tomato in, southern Italy, picked from the vine, tastes so different from one that you might buy in a supermarket that's been grown hydroponically, never seen soil, never seen a soil rhizosphere. and it's been picked green so it can be transported and then ethylene ripened when it is really not got the full, it hasn't gone through the full developmental process to allow true ripening to occur. Why does it taste so different? Well, because our tongues and our taste buds act a little bit like gas liquid chromatographs, and we
Mm.
can distinguish these different compounds in it. And if it tastes like water and it tastes bland, it's lacking a bunch of phytochemicals that the one grown vine ripened, sun ripened Italian version doesn't lack. So
Yeah.
we've got to start to recognize that one of the reasons that we have this sophisticated sense of taste, is one of our limited five senses. Our visual sense is also incredibly limited, and it's very different animal to animal. But we've got to use it. So if we
Yeah.
start our kids being adapted to bland food, we're basically subjecting them to a high risk of chronic disease later in life because they will not search out these, bitter and sour, and they're not searching for diversity. They're actually searching for simplicity, and they're basically becoming addicted to certain foods that match a bliss point that their reward system, their opioid reward system is looking for. And so food addiction now is right at the heart of many of the problems. It's, you can provide top-down health messaging and say, hey guys, go out there and eat a healthy diet. Are
Yeah.
you telling me that people who are morbidly obese don't know that they could eat differently? Of course they do, but they're locked into an addiction cycle that makes it so hard for them to climb out of that. And unless we have a medical system that is able to understand the complexity of our emotional and psychological and biochemical and even electromagnetic, you know, addiction to the wrong foodstuffs, we're not going to even begin to climb out of that. And that's before, we start looking at things that are other than food, that are a big part of the healthcare equation.
Yeah. I'm really happy that you brought energy into the picture because a lot of people they tend to think very linear, diet, exercise, and this is about it. But often the energy that we're exposed to, the light that we're exposed to, I think a lot of people are aware now that yes, we do need sunlight, and now we have a lot of red light therapy. We're starting to see that more and more around to help get those light frequencies, especially when you live in a country like we do in Ireland and in UK, we maybe not get as much sun, so things like that can be beneficial. But what you said about the food is great, and I run into that all the time. People, they really do get addicted to the sweetness in the food, and it already starts from the baby being in the womb. And when I talk with parents, I'm like, well, what you do right now already sets the tone for your children, and because it's in the breast milk, then it's in the initial foods. And if the
100%.
mother is eating nothing but sugary carbs, then the baby gets a taste for that. And then they give them some formula, which is mainly sugar based. I mean, the nutrition in there is absolutely horrible. And so I know when we had our son, my I was really strict with my partner, and she ate all the right things. And then if she didn't breastfeed, I gave our baby bone broth. I put bone broth in a
Yeah.
bottle, and she said he'll never drink it. Well, my God, did he drink it? And he craved it. And
Yeah.
we have a beautifully strong son these days
Yeah.
that does like bitter and sour foods.
Yep.
Of course, they
Yep.
have a little bit of sweet stuff too, but
Yep.
I think, yeah, we get really addicted to the food. And I know some of the charts you were talking about because I use them every day when I show people and I show them the different foods and the glycemic load in terms of value of spoons of sugar. And when you look at it, you go, well, what do we have there? We got rice, we got potatoes, we got pasta, we've got all the sweet fruits, you got your whole wheat bread and so forth. And then I think there was a slice of whole wheat bread was the equivalent of 3 spoons of sugar. And so I
Yeah.
tell people, well, now you think you're being healthy, you're having your sandwich, so that's 2 slices of bread. So we're already at 6 spoons. And then you're going to have your banana with it, and that's another 6 spoons. And
Yeah.
then you may have an apple for in between the snack somewhere. That's another 2 spoons. And that's only a healthy lunch, right?
And
And then
and
we
then
add all of
you
the other.
might also decide you're going to sort of leave the butter aside because you bought into the public health messaging that butter is bad without any recognition that the consumption of a healthy fat alongside those carbohydrates are going to blunt your blood sugar response. I mean, this is basic physiology that should
Yes.
be known really by everyone, but it's not taught. And we can dramatically change our response by food combinations and food timing. If you look at a lot of traditional diets, particularly in places that have had long-standing healthcare traditions where food has been used as medicine, and I'm thinking particularly in Ayurveda, Unani, traditional Chinese medicine, some of the South American traditions, you'll see that the food combinations have been worked out over millennia. You'll see that they have medicinal menus in restaurants. Even if you're menopausal, you'll eat certain types of foods. If you're a kid who wants to build strength, you'll have a different kind of food. If you've got cognitive issues, you'll have different foods again. But we have lost that understanding as the standard American diet has become dominant. And, we've looked at dietary patterns now in parts of the world. We did some particular work in Malaysia a few years back, where you look at traditional foods that were consumed, and they have specific names, like a standard breakfast in Malaysia is a thing called a nasi lemak. Nasi means rice, and you will have bit of rice. Used to have a bit of chicken that was raised in the kampong in the village, that was running around free range without a lot of fat, and certainly wasn't pumped with estrogens and all the rest of it. That was just tossed in the wok. Now it's deep fried, and it's a battery chicken. It's 3 times the size. The sambal, the chili sauce that you have with it, has become 60% sugar. It is so sweet with the chili in it. And then the ikan bilis and the kacang and the peanuts and the little fried fish that used to be a decent serving is just a tiny little condiment, mainly for appearance on the side. So the overall impact on your physiology of that meal that has the same name that people have had for hundreds of years is entirely different. So even something like the importation of the rice cooker in Asia. So they used to cook their rice in the morning and allow it to boil it up in large vats and let it go cool. And then as you make your meal during the course of the day, you take small amounts of rice. And of course, the fact that the rice will have cooled means that it's all turned to resistant starch.
Yeah.
But if you pull it out of your rice cooker and it remains hot all the time, you're just piling in the sugar into your bloodstream. And surprise, surprise, Malaysia now, followed by UAE, a couple of Middle Eastern countries, has the highest obesity rate in the world. When I've traveled there recently, raw coconuts are a thing. When it's a hot day, you can, just lop the top off a coconut, and they sell them on the side of the street, put a straw in it, and you drink from it. These days, they ask you, do you want to have sugar in it to drink the coconut water? I mean,
Wow.
it's just addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. It is exactly that. It is an addiction, and the sugar, whether it's and people get confused too. It doesn't have to be sugar. It's the starches, it's the natural sugars
Yeah.
in the food that we get addicted to. And I've seen that again, if I work with people that have been addicted to drugs, especially some of the heavier drugs, let's say cocaine, for example, I have to give them nutritional consulting right away, because I know the first
Yeah.
thing that they're going to do when they come off that is they're going to attack the candy, the donuts, and all that stuff. And they've just found a replacement,
Yeah.
for their addiction. And we have what we have today, highest obesity and disease rates that we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And we think we're so intelligent and smart. And I'm going, well, if what we were doing was working, shouldn't that be lower?
Yeah.
But
Well, that
this is what happened.
this is why Coca-Cola, understood that so well, combining sugar and cocaine originally,
Yeah.
hence the name Coca-Cola. Once they understood that this was what the reward pathways, opioid reward pathways were all about, let's just create a beverage that creates addiction. And since then, I mean, it's one of the reasons I've got an ethical issue behind Coke. There's a lot of people now consuming Coke Zero and all these, so-called sugar-free versions. But as you'll know the science, Richard, that the effect of sweetness now signals an insulin response because the body goes, hold on, he or she or it or they or whatever they are consuming a sweet stuff. I better start punching out, getting my pancreas active and punch out that insulin. So there's a lot of people on these sugar-free beverages that are not getting through their sweetness addiction, and they're still creating insulin resistance, as well as leptin resistance and all the rest of it. So yeah, it's a big unraveling of the way in which we engage with food in this world. That at the root of it, we need to get the information we already know out there. And the question is, can we do it one by one through clinicians? There's a tiny group. If you look at all the clinicians like yourself that understand these issues, you are a tiny group of people, and yet one might imagine that this would be the responsibility of governments through public health programs, but they choose to not engage with these issues. This is the politics of healthcare at work again. They choose not to engage with them because they have themselves, these agencies have revolving doors with big food and big pharma. So the last thing they want to do is actually resolve the health problems. So, and that's how we come across these massive bloopers, on the cholesterol myth, the low fat myth, the low salt myth is another one. If you look at the work out of McMaster's University in Canada that you're probably familiar with, they did all the original work saying, don't consume too much sodium, you will increase your risk of hypertension. Very shortly after that, they said, don't consume too little either. There's a wonderful U-shaped curve in terms of sodium balance, sodium-potassium balance. You've got to get into the sweet spot. That was, again, the result of our own evolution as coastal dwellers who consumed quite a lot of salty fish. So we consumed a lot of salt. We lived in hot countries. We sweated a lot. And the risk, particularly with women who consume below 4 grams of sodium, actually increases their hypertension risk as well. And so when governments say consume less than 6 grams, the assumption is the less the better. It's not the case at all. It's consumed between 4 and 6 grams, which for most people, if you look at the dietary surveys, there's very, very few people consuming more than 6 grams of sodium. 6 grams of sodium, if you look at the molecular weight of sodium chloride, means you're consuming over 12.5 grams of salt, of sodium chloride. And there's only a tiny group of junk food eaters who are doing that. And most of the very high salt intake that comes from epidemiological observational studies is then confounded with junk food diets. So we don't have evidence from salt itself. So it's a bit of a non-issue. If you just consume moderately salted foods and you use non-industrially produced salt, in other words, a sea salt, a Himalayan salt or whatever, and not table salt. Table salt is chemically produced sodium chloride that often has flowing agents like silicon dioxide in it that really is not good for you. It screws up your microbiome. But if we consume a natural salt and we have moderately salted foods, for nearly everyone, that is the best for heart health. And yet public health messaging would suggest otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I say unprocessed salt is like the ultimate multi-mineral that you could take. It's
Correct.
And when you take it and everything is in balance, it keeps everything in balance. And like you said, the processed salt, which is essentially has been stripped of all of those, it creates such an imbalance. And then as you probably hear and I hear all the time, oh, my doctor said I should go on a low salt diet because I have blood pressure issues and this and that. And then you go, well, yeah, there's a little bit more than that to that.
Yeah.
And then we see over the last 70 to 80 years, the small handful of food lies that we're told salt is bad, don't eat too much protein, don't eat too much fat, because everything is going to kill us. And when we look at these and we go, well, these are the most nutritionally dense foods that we can actually consume. And now we've taken those like in my chart I have in the clinic, I said now people have taken the proteins and the fats and they put them down in the bottom and we put the carbohydrates up here. And I said, it doesn't work like that.
No,
Right.
no. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Bobby
then,
Kennedy just tried to reverse the food pyramid.
yes.
We've done an analysis of that. Unfortunately, he was so desperate to create an image that everyone would love, everyone on our side of the fence would love. But if you look at the detailed text that accompanies it, it's very misleading because actually, in the text is the fact that you might be able to consume up to 8 portions of grains, and that's sitting at the bottom of the new pyramid,
uh,
of which 4 need to be whole. And he doesn't say anything about the mechanical processing of that whole. But if you've got 8 portions there, why isn't it sitting up at the top where you've got a similar number of portions of meat and dairy? So
yeah.
it was again the politics of health at work with a Kennedy spin, desperately trying to regain support from Maha supporters, Make America Healthy Again supporters, who had become somewhat disillusioned with the fact that he hadn't done what they had hoped he might have done by now. There's still time, and we're working on that, but he hasn't done a lot that's helpful to our mission.
Well, I don't envy his position because I can imagine the amount of stress in politics in every direction that you're dealing with. So I don't think people understand. It's just that you can't go in there and make a law, and then that's all going to happen. It's you're a better person to talk about that than myself. But yeah, but I think at least it's starting to go in the right direction. So hopefully that will gain some momentum.
Yeah, it's. I think a lot of it is finding their feet, understanding what they can do through policy, because essentially that's the only way that they can act. So yeah, we have 30 initiatives that we're unfolding in the United States at Kennedy and Dr. McCary, the FDA commissioner's door. That is all about how you kind of reframe the regulatory environment moving forward. But right at the heart of that is how you define a food, how you define a drug, how you define a nutrient, um, how you define a dietary ingredient. These these are mechanisms. We've done a 2-year study looking at 18 different jurisdictions around the world over a 120-year time period, looking at how definitions, the change in the use of definitions, have essentially been modified over that time period. You know the expression "boil the frog slowly,"
Yes.
but been modified over that time period in order to move from the original objective of protecting consumer health through to now what they do, which is protect corporate health, the bank balance of the corporations. And we have a bizarre situation where drug law and food law do almost nothing to protect humans, so that you know depending on, if you look at Peter Gotch's work, the co-founder of the Cochrane collaboration, um, he shows pretty neatly that properly prescribed drugs are now the third leading cause of death in society. And we can see from copious studies that inappropriate nutrition, fast food diets, ultra processed foods, the modern standard American diet, is right at the heart of most chronic disease. It's not the sole cause by any means, but it is a major factor in pretty much all chronic diseases.
Yeah, and those two examples there are, like we said, everything can be found in nature, and those two things are the farthest thing away from nature: processed foods and pharmaceutical drugs. Not that there isn't a use for some pharmaceuticals at certain times, but I would say that would be probably more an emergency type medicine, but not for you know regaining health. It's just
Yeah.
it's an
Restorative,
impossibility.
yeah, restorative and regenerative health have not been part of the picture. It's interesting when you look at healthcare, we think of, you know, prevention, which means disease prevention, but we don't think of health regeneration, or what is often or should be referred to as salutogenesis, as the creation of health. And the
Mhm.
creation of health has got to start preconception because of the epigenetic link. It's got to start from before birth, and then it's got to occur throughout the lifespan. And the more we can work on health care rather than disease management and maintain health through the totality of someone's life, the less likely we are to have the kind of healthcare crisis that we face now, where essentially the system is akin to us deciding that we are not going to service our motor cars anymore. We're just going to drive them around until they break down on the side of the road. And then we're going to ring up the garage and say, hey guys, my car's broken down. And they're going to say, oh, geez, you know, you need new tires, you need a major engine rebuild. I mean, what's that about? Well, we look after our motor cars more carefully than we look after. Yeah, think even of the insurance scheme. Why can't we get no claims bonuses for being incentivized to look after our health? So our insurance premiums, if we want to take out private health insurance, reduces if we look after our health properly. In other words, we make fewer claims. We do that with our motor cars. We don't do it with health. Why not? It's all about money, all about
That's
control, all about
that's it.
power.
And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And unfortunately, it always seems to come down to money, isn't it? Uh, and I always thought, man, if we, with all the knowledge that we have on how to improve health and all the inventions that we've had to improve this planet, if they weren't just bought and buried, what a world we could actually live in now. It would be such a marvelous place. And
Well,
this is
that
the work that we have to do to bring this back.
that is the work that you and I are involved in right now. The whoever sits and listens to this, if it can make a small difference to the choices that they make in life, and to understand that the power is within, really, in many of these situations, we have to stop waiting for governments to fix things. There's very, very few examples where governments actually do good for people. Ultimately, there's nearly always, I mean, you know, nearly always an ulterior motive of where they're doing something that's going to be good for them, or, you know, good for the corporations. The what we often think of as the corporatocracy, where essentially governments and corporations have almost become one, and they determine a system that benefits them. In other words, the people in charge, the people in control, the people who hold the balance of power. But we can actually start to become independent of that system. And that's why the grassroots pressure, grassroots education, the empowerment movement, the health empowerment movement, that's one of the reasons that the MAHA movement in America has gained so much popularity, because people said, wow, you know, we've got here a guy at the top who's kind of on our side, but we can
Yeah.
also hold him accountable if he doesn't do what we want him to do, because ultimately we want to be able to make the choices that we need to make to be able to choose food that hasn't been gene edited. I mean, right now in the United States, the infiltration of synbio foods, of gene edited foods into the mainstream food supply is occurring. It's occurring without any indication on a label. So how on earth, if it doesn't appear on a label, can you make a choice to say, I don't want my kids to eat this stuff? And of course, these very same biotech companies that are doing this are the ones who were involved in GMO version 1, in which Europe decided to have mandatory declarations for GMO foods. And once they did that, no one would touch it. So,
Yeah.
Americans will often think that there was a ban in Europe on GMOs. There wasn't a ban. There was mandatory GMO labeling that caused people to not consume it. We've now moved to GMO 2, where you don't consume the genetically modified organism anymore. You consume a product that is produced by it. So you take a fungi, you gene edit it, using one of, a variety of gene editing techniques. And it will produce a particular ingredient. It might be casein, it might be whey, it might be a meat protein. And essentially what they've got through the door of regulatory agencies, both in the United States and in Europe, which are the two regulatory systems that essentially act as the templates for all other regulatory systems, is they say, we'll use this principle of substantial equivalence. If the product that comes out of this bioreactor is something that we recognize through conventional cultivation, whether it's through, milking of cattle or producing crops, then there's no need for disclosure. That's the ingredient, regardless of its origin. And what that ignores, what we're beginning to see evidence of, is the non-local effects on gene expression. So you take that particular, organism. It might be, say, brewer's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, very commonly used. And, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae produces a whole range of different compounds that naturally, but you gene edit it to produce suddenly whey protein. And while it's producing whey protein, it's also producing through non-local effects, because you've spliced in that new trait. You've changed the whole pattern of gene expression. You're then trying to concentrate those specific ingredients and sell it as a dietary ingredient, but you've got other contaminants in them. And what happens if we're exposed to foreign proteins? They're all pro-inflammatory. They all create an inflammatory response. The body, the immune system goes, what the hell's this stuff? Never seen it before. So, and of course, it's really difficult to detect, because all of the problems that we see in society, whether they are, chronic diseases, degenerative diseases, they are all inflammatory diseases. Inflammation sits at the base of all of these diseases. So it becomes really difficult to attribute through cause and effect the fact that these foods are creating a problem, yet we're slowly contaminating the entire food supply with it. And they've got a regulatory system that does not allow the average consumer. So one of the studies that we've been looking at, and working with John Fagan, who's the ex-GMO scientist who's been looking at this, he studied a product that's on the US market called bored cow. It's a Saccharomyces produced bioreactor, version of cow's milk, designed for vegans who bought into the climate change scenario. And isn't it wonderful to be able to consume this vegan milk that tastes like milk because it's got whey protein in it? Well, he's found 94 proteins in it, 94 proteins, excuse my dog, that are new to nature, never been seen before.
Wow.
And, yet it's passed FDA scrutiny. It's cleared because it's substantially equivalent to the stuff you get out of a dairy cow.
Yeah, that's astounding. I mean, that many unknown proteins for the body. I mean, when I do a lot of advanced blood chemistry at my clinic, and it's very unusual to see somebody that doesn't have higher levels of inflammation in their body. But when you consider like you said, all the foods that we're reacting to, plus everything in the environment and the stresses that we're under, And then we go, well, no wonder people aren't healing because their body is in a constant fight or flight mode. They're in survival mode. And until we can get that person out that, they're not going to get better. And this is why we see people, they come to me and they bring a stack of 3 to 4 inches of tests and stuff that they've been around, and nobody can figure it out because there's so much inflammatory stuff going on in their body, and it's layers and layers of treatment that's required. But again, the answer is very simple. We got to go back to basics. And it seems a lot of people, they
100%.
they they seem a little confounded that it's that simple.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have lost our way, and it's the same thing as sitting being the new smoking, as something that Leo has pushed really hard for very good reasons.
Yeah,
But my goodness, if we could help people to understand the benefits of standing up and doing a few squats every hour rather than sitting down for 8 hours at a time, we could also transform health. So
yeah,
yeah, it's there are some basic elements of healthcare that are not being taught, and the way in which I think we can create a big effect rapidly in terms of our own evolution is making sure that the next generation start to become aware of this information. And it's at a critical time when we're seeing, if you like, the technosphere altering so dramatically with digitization of our lives, the reliance on of digital systems, whether it is for communication, whether it is for intelligence. This is why I think we need to also bring the transhumanist debate to the healthcare debate, because we're at this cusp where there is a battle between what is the best way forward for humanity, and you've got basically the techno addicts who are saying technology is the solution. We will always find a technological solution for a human problem. And we saw, the contest we saw very clearly during COVID was what we do. We suppress any kind of natural, immune resilience protocol when a new virus came along, whether we thought it was made in a lab or not. Either way, you would have thought a logical, our very first article we wrote over 350 articles during the COVID era on these issues. Very first one was on building immune resilience. What we'd need to do, all the natural things that we could do to build it. Yet they suppressed that, they censored that, and they said, no, the solution has got to be using a technology that we've never used before. It was people were so confident in something simply because it was a potential silver bullet that had this sort of techno label on it that was probably going to be better than anything than silly old nature could come up with. And
yeah,
so there was this massive suppression. So now we live in a world where people think of nature, particularly the ones who are more technologically inclined, they think of nature as something that's very primitive, very simple, something that really hasn't got much to teach us, without really understanding. Those of us who are involved in research on nature will say it should be our ultimate teacher, what we can learn from nature. And we see this in all sorts of different areas of pursuit. Finally, in the field of aerodynamics, as they're trying to create more fuel efficient aircraft, we've got an interest in how birds fly, and we've got the application of some of this natural aerodynamics that has been, created over, millennia, filtering its way into aircraft design. Finally, guys, it's been out there all the time. You just got to look for it. And we should be doing the same thing when it comes to healthcare. We've got to look to nature. What has nature to offer? And it's got a treasure trove to offer, but we've got to look at everything from what we're eating and how we're behaving, how we're socializing. The very fact that people don't eat um, in social, environments anymore. People eat, watching a TV screen or a movie. Um, that the rest and digest part of our, autonomic nervous system is largely ignored, but we can't extract the nutrients from our food unless we're relaxing.
Yeah.
It's we got to be in a parasympathetic mode to be able to do that. And people, as you said earlier, in permanent fight or flight, you see what's going on in Iran while you're eating your food. You're not going to be digesting that food very well at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm big when we do eat as a together as a family. It's like we don't talk about problems on the table. We can save that for another time.
Yeah.
Because yeah, you're right. It does affect the digestion. And again, to your point, the answer is generally it always comes back to nature. And the more technological we become, we get farther away from that, and farther away from what you said at the very beginning about that energy and how that energy affects us. That energy is not coming from tech products, that's coming from the nature. And there is plenty of research out there. And initially, when I was going to do my dissertation, I was thinking about doing it on grounding, and the amount I was astounded the amount of scientific papers that are out there on the benefits of grounding for the human body and how
Yeah.
simply doing that correctly can help so many people and their conditions, their inflammatory processes. And it's simple. Go out in nature, take a walk in the forest, take your shoes off, jump in the sea, all very simple things that cost no money, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm talking to you in a camper van at the moment. I've given up the idea of living in a house, because I'm so keen to be in nature. Why live in a house, when you can be, in any spot in nature and not have to travel to get there. But yeah, it's, our bind to materialism is really at the is part of our downfall, as a species at the moment. And we you know even if you look at what's happened in terms of our spiritual consciousness,
Hmm.
there's been a big impact. So-called religion, which is, perhaps could be seen as, the human interpretation of the systems that have been built around something that we know exists that goes beyond our understanding, that we could view as spirituality. That whole system has become sort of knocked out of us as people become, they worship now at the altar of materialism. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's, we're kind of somewhat stuck, but I think, the pendulum swings, and it keeps swinging. And once it's gone to one of the extremes, which is, I think, pretty much where we are at the moment, it has to start swinging back. And it may not have, you know, I've toyed with the idea whether we're at a bifurcation in human evolution, where we
Mhm.
will see, you know, a human subspecies moving forward that engages with transhumanism and is happy to completely blur the distinctions, happy to, they're working on synthetic consciousness at the moment, let alone implantable mobile devices. Read
Yeah.
Klaus Schwaber's, Fourth Industrial Revolution that he published in 2017. The founder of the World Economic Forum. It's got 23 technologies in there that are moving forward, that are part of transhumanism, gene edited babies
Mhm.
as well. I mean, these things are happening, but will we get a subset of people who say, do you know what? We don't want that. We want to maintain the kind of humanity that we've had, at least for the last few tens of thousands of years. And we want our link to nature and the cosmos, or however you want to see it. But we don't want to incorporate aspects of technology into our being. We want a discrete boundary between ourselves and these digital systems.
Yeah, I think the trick is getting the balance, how we can use technology to benefit us, but like don't integrate it into our biology. So, for instance, a lot of people are using wearable fit devices. And for a lot of people, that can be an eye opener for them because it can give them valuable information. They go, oh yeah, I'm not moving enough, or I'm not sleeping enough. And I was very resistant on using them myself. And then I used them and I'm like, it's amazing what getting an extra hour of sleep or an extra 3,000 steps can do to your overall
Yeah.
health statistics. So I think there is a place for them, but when it overtakes and hijacks the human spirit, then I think we're in for a big, big, big problem.
Yeah, it comes down to this idea of, over reliance, and even addiction. I mean, the problem, and there's obviously a huge debate ever since Australia decided to ban social media for the under 16s.
Right.
But there's a recognition that digital addiction is now a major health challenge, psychological health challenge for young people, and yes, whether or not that's the right way of responding is a question I haven't even answered in my own mind. But I would, my sense is that it should not be done through government regulation. It should be done through familial, social circle, social group education. I've had 6 children, none of them addicted to any technology, because from the youngest age um, they've heard about the risks of overusing it. And
Yeah.
even my youngest ones are, they don't have social media profiles. They don't, they know that it's addictive. They've seen the effects among their friends who are addicted to it. But
Yeah.
the concern about the regulation is that it's the same problem of keeping confectionery completely away. If you never allow your child to have a piece of chocolate, what's going to happen when they leave home and can buy as much chocolate as they like? Um,
Yeah.
the same thing applies. What happens if you've starved your child and haven't educated them around responsible use of digital technologies, and suddenly at 16 they can use it? They're going to become addicts as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's we need to reframe the whole of the way in which we approach these issues, but ultimately we need to understand the why behind them. What are the elements of it that work with health and support health, and what are the elements of it that create over reliance and addiction?
And and I think, yeah, we can't rely on the government to do that, but I think that really comes down to the family, and we're talking about our children. It really comes down to the parents. And I have parents that bring their kids in, and they want me to help their kids because they have, problem X, Y, and Z. And then I go through it, and then I'm like, well, I don't actually need to be talking to the kids. I actually need to be talking to you, because you're
Exactly.
the one who's feeding your child, and you're the one that's allowing him to have that. So don't blame your child. I need to talk to you. And some of them get almost offended at it, but then when they think about it, they're like, you know what? I think you're right.
Exactly. I know.
Yeah.
It does get very close to the bone sometimes, and again, that's the skill in the practitioner. In terms, I mean, to be honest, that's why I'm such a huge fan of clinical psychoneuroimmunology, because I think it's one of
Yeah.
the few disciplines that really delves into what the emotional response will be, not just in the individual, but also if you are talking to parents, understanding the response. It's like the stress response. For years in functional medicine, people have understood, Hans Selye and the adaptive stress response.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't necessarily look at what are the mechanisms for stress transformation that, allows, for example, the same stressor to create a completely different response in one person who thrives off that very same stressor, because they convert that stress into a positive response
Yeah.
compared to the individual that converts it into a negative response. So that those kind of nuances, um, they don't really feature, certainly not in a general practitioner's education. I say that with my oldest son is a surgeon in the UK's National Health Service, He's
Mhm.
been through the top medical training in Cambridge University, UCL, University College London. He's now a consultant surgeon, but they don't get trained in any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to
Yeah.
have more specialist generalists out there.
Yeah. And I think that's the issue. I've said this many in other discussions where medicine has become modern medicine, allopathic medicine has become very reductionist. So you have this very narrow reductionist view, and this is why we have 1,000 different specialists. Everybody's focusing on this little minute aspect of something, but like you said, who's putting it together? Who's putting the whole together that we can get some resolutions to our issues and problems? And I think this is the challenge when we're dealing with practitioners. And recently I was in a room of medical doctors where we discuss these, and there are, we give out to doctors a lot of time, but there is a percentage of them out there that do want to do better, that realize that maybe they're not helping their patients as much as they could, and they are looking for different approaches. But this is where the politics comes into things again. And I think if we're hoping that the schools and the teachings are going to change, I don't think that's going to happen for a while, as long as there's a monetary value put on things. So I think that really comes individually to these people, and actually creating help there.
Yeah,
So
e-
yeah,
exactly. Let me just play the devil's advocate briefly.
yeah,
Very tempting to sometimes imagine that the integrative, alternative, complementary medicine side of the healthcare equation has got all of this sorted. And in fact, when you compare, you know, conventional with CAM, if I can use that expression, CAM for
yeah,
complementary alternative medicine, um, the difficulty we have with the CAM system is that you drop in as a patient, you go into that system almost at the consultant, at the secondary care level, because you've got a specialist who's a homeopath, a nutritionist, a body worker,
mhm,
massage therapist, psychotherapist. So you've got a problem that, for example, might be the fact that you got a suppressed immune system, but you may not know that you have a tumor developing somewhere. And we've seen many cases of this. Technically, if the if the conventional system worked better and had a broader understanding of human physiology and health, the system is actually better set where the patient first sees a generalist, the primary care physician, the
mhm,
GP. If that GP was trained better, that GP would be able to triage someone into a healthcare pathway that address those problems. The difficulty is that the education that generalist has still allows them to just try and, diagnose and treat a specific symptom in a particular organ system, and that generally points them to the secondary care specialist consultant, assuming the generalist, the primary care physician can't deal with it. But in the CAM area, we don't even have that. So you just drop straight in. What we have is a much higher level of effective self-care.
mhm,
So the ability for someone who's more CAM dependent to take responsibility for their health, to the good clinician who is a integrative practitioner of one modality or another, um, is actually a good generalist as well. So I mean, if I look at, say, homeopathy, we're spending a lot of time defending homeopathy because it's under massive attack in Europe as it is in the United States. In the United States, all homeopathic medicines at the moment are deemed by the FDA, the current FDA, as illegal. And we have a lawsuit to try and say that their revocation of the compliance guideline that made them illegal should never have occurred and is actually illegal in itself.
Yeah.
But a good homeopath is someone who recognizes the whole system and doesn't just administer homeopathic medicines for the symptom. But a bad homeopath may actually just prescribe some medications for that symptom, and then it becomes much more, much more like conventional treatments where you're just dealing with symptom treatment. So
Yeah.
yeah, we have a long way to go to redevelop a system that does triage people into the most effective pathways, and those pathways are incredibly difficult for the average person to find. In the cancer world, probably that is the most complicated journey, particularly if you've got a life-threatening cancer. It's one of the reasons that we've done so much work with Yes to Life, the UK Integrative Cancer Charity, and I have acted as science lead with them for over a decade, because it's so challenging. And the system, the cancer establishment has been trying to control cancer pathways for years and years, and wants to essentially just carry on doing chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and surgery as the primary tools in dealing with cancer. And of course, I think the change that we're now seeing is being driven by patients, cancer patients and their families, who go, do you know, we've done all this reading, or we've seen this experience of people who've had these incredible transformations when they look at the whole system. And
Yeah.
but these pathways need to be illuminated with neon signs to help people to find them. Otherwise, we will continue to lose people needlessly. The knowledge is out there. It's just largely it's censored, it's hidden, it's concealed by the political system that does just that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like we said earlier, just imagine if we put all the pieces in the right place where we could be, and listen, it's a possibility, and I don't think it's in everybody wants to fight. We want to fight the system, and I think it a little bit differently. Well, why don't we just create a different system and let people choose a better pathway,
100%.
and then the old system will just eventually fade out, and just like we talk about all the other tech stuff in foods that are damaging and killing our health. Well, ultimately vote with our dollar, our euro, or our pound, wherever we're situated in the world. And if keep buying that junk, well, we're supporting those companies, and we're supporting that way of life. And so we simply invest it somewhere else. And we've seen over times that now there are more healthier options available for us because people are requesting it, right?
Mm, exactly.
Um, and people go, "Well, I don't see it in the store." I'm going, "Well, did you ever talk to the manager and say this is what I want?" If they don't know, you're not going to get it, so you have to make it known, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Eh,
But check out what's happening in the stores. If you look at the free from aisles are massively expanding in
Yeah,
major multiple supermarkets, because people realize that when they move away from consuming common allergens like gluten containing cereals and dairy, they feel better. But the technological response to that is that some of these gluten-free, and dairy-free foods are just full of a laundry list of starches and other nasties
yeah,
that are, bad for the body in different ways. Yes, you remove that allergen, but you put a whole bunch of things back into a human being that either there's very little research on, or we know categorically are harmful. So yeah, getting back to simpler patterns of eating and understanding what we can do to try and eat pretty much a diet that's closer to the one that we evolved with, has got to be the way to go. Trying to search out heirloom varieties of vegetables and fruits that contain way less sugar and have way higher polyphenol contents. Vegetables, above ground vegetables, that it's quite a useful distinction to distinguish between the vegetative parts of a plant that grow above ground compared with the parts that grow below ground. The stuff that
Yeah.
grows below ground are storage organs. They are starches. They're starch based.
Yeah.
And if you want to reduce someone's blood sugar, just don't cut out vegetables. Cut out below ground vegetables. And in Ireland, I gather that's quite difficult to do because you have an obsession for potatoes.
Yeah, there's a lot of potatoes here, and it seems every meal has to have potatoes with it. So, when you work with people and tell them maybe you should reduce or cut that out, you kind of get that look. Yeah, but I've been eating that my whole life, and I'm going, well, maybe try without it for a while and see how we do.
Or eat them as resistant starch.
Resistant
Go
starch, yeah.
so eat
So the
cook
same
your
thing you said
potatoes,
with the
let them
rice.
cool, and have them in a potato salad when they're cold, and then it's resistant starch, good for the microbiome.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like what you said there before, because you can do that with rices and potatoes. Cook them,
Yeah,
cool them down for a day, and then reheat them. I if I what I tell people is when they boil their rice, put a spoonful of coconut oil in there or something like that. So then when it cools down and you reheat it again the next day, that because some people go, well, it's a little bit harder. Now the oil's in there, it keeps it soft, and because the
exactly.
fat's in there, it keeps
Yeah,
that glycemic value nice and
yeah,
balanced.
yeah,
So there are
yeah,
little ways that we can get around with it. And I think these are the things that again have been lost with everything that's in our society is quick and fast and all the processed and ultra processed foods is, well, how did we used to prepare those foods, right? When we looked at
exactly.
your grandmother and your great grandmother, well, they were cooking food all day long because the food had to be prepared and broken down. Geez,
Yeah,
I remember the pressure cooker being, the rocker top was going off, and that was being used all the time because it broke down the foods in a way that made it easier for your digestive system to deal with it. So,
yeah,
um,
yeah. I never eat any pulses, without putting them through the pressure cooker.
yeah,
See, the microwave oven is, and now the air fryer are both problematic in terms of cooking methods. We need to bring the pressure cooker back, and there's some. In fact, you guys, because you're Canadian by origin,
yes,
the Canadian Instant Pot. That's the brand of pressure cooker that I've got. It's a fantastic device.
it is.
Yeah, really such a great way to cook your pulses. And you literally, one of the reasons that in Ayurveda, if you're going to make, a dal, for example, from pulses, it'll always be a 6 to 8 hour slow simmer. And if you measure the lectin content of over time, there've been a lot of papers that have been published in India on that. You'll see the lectins are zero after 6 to 8 hours of slow cooking, but 40 minutes in a pressure cooker does the same thing. So
Yeah,
the difficulty is that people using a sort of Jamie Oliver recipe, going along to the supermarket, buying their lentils, tossing them into a saucepan with a bit of curry powder, and saying, "Here's my dal in 15 minutes." Because unfortunately, the pre-cooking in those packets is very limited.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've seen that with patients as well, where they have lectin sensitivities, and mainly patients that have inflammatory issues like arthritis and fibromyalgia. And I find that they often eat quite a lot of lectins. And then when we either reduce that out of their diet or get them to cook it properly, like you mentioned with the Instapot or pressure cookers, that amazingly their aches and pains they start going
Yeah,
away. And
I mean that.
so it's really phenomenal to see, yeah, how all these even plant toxins can affect us. And I think we're hearing more and more of that out there about lectins and oxalates and salicylate and
Yeah.
phytic acids. All these things can be reduced if we take the time to prepare them properly.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah,
most traditional systems take that into account one way or another. They minimize the exposure to those kinds of compounds, and obviously we have differential. Some people are way more sensitive to oxalates than other people, for example.
yeah,
Same thing with lectins. If you are a non-celiac gluten sensitive, which may represent over 50% of the population, you're probably going to be more sensitive to lectins because your gut has lost its permeability because of the impact on zonulin, and you start leaking, and
Mhm.
yeah. So yeah, it's a complex old picture, isn't it? Trying to fix our health.
Yeah, complex, simple but complex. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but yeah. So okay, so if in discussing all this, if we were to redesign healthcare systems from the ground up, what role would nutrition, environmental health, and personalized medicine play in that future model?
Right. Well, I think first of all, it would take an ecological perspective to healthcare. So
Mhm.
we are, um, a complex, advanced mammal species living in a semi-synthetic, partially natural environment. And we interact both internally and externally with that system every day of the week, from the air we breathe, the water that we drink, the environments we frequent. And we have to start thinking of our, of those interactions. Very often we'll think of the exposome. What are we being exposed to externally in terms of environmental chemicals? But we've got to think of the interaction, and that interaction is what ecology is all about. So once we have that sort of bigger picture perspective, and we see the individual within the social system and the environmental system that they engage with, and we look both at the external environment and the inner environment. And when I think of the inner environment, I'm thinking of the, inner microbiological environment, but I'm also thinking of the biofield, the energetic state of that being. There's more and more data to suggest some of the work that's been done in the field of biophysics now is really starting to redefine what life is. We are ultimately, energetic beings. Every single cell issues photons, and we see in a cancer patient, for example, the photonic output, this low level, highly coherent light that we issue from our cells. We are beings of light, reduces substantially. We think of this. Wow, that person has got bad energy. Their energy is low. Someone
Uh,
who brings joy to a room, their resonance is high. Someone who has high resonance has often high health. So, these are the sort of multiple layers of seeing ourselves within an ecological system. So, then when we start to think of what we expose ourselves to, well, it's a simple process of, removing and replacing the elements of that environment and those exposures that are bad for us, replacing them with the stuff that is good for us. And yes, it becomes very complex when we think of, say, EMFs, but electromagnetic fields, but we've got to think about, how we locate ourselves in relation to a computer. You know, are you? I mean, I use a gadget called a tri-field meter that allows me to measure electromagnetic and electrical, radiation, as well as radio frequency radiation. So across those three areas. And it
yeah.
means you can take it to the places that you spend most of the time in, and you can determine. So the places where you work, where you socialize, where you sleep, these are really the most important things. Um, and so you may have electrical wiring that's in the wall directly behind your bed that is a very close distance to your brain when you're sleeping. Now, and you may have a metal bed frame, or you may have metal springs within your mattress that are amplifying that radiation output. Um, so from all those levels, from the chemicals to the social exposures to the electromagnetic exposures, we need to sort of minimize the stuff that does us harm, and then we move towards this idea of our ancestral exposure. What were the things that we used to be exposed to that we have had more time to adapt to? Because in many respects, 21st century disease are really diseases of maladaptation to the Anthropocene, to the environment that we currently live in, that is largely an anthropogenic environment. People spend their time surrounded by concrete and artificial illumination, digital devices that are radiating not just blue light at them, but also digital frequencies that have an entirely different wave pattern to cosmic rays or natural light. Um, and yeah, that has to become the sort of foundation of how we start to use salutogenesis, this idea of health-centric behavior that basically lasts from preconception to the time we die. Because it's, if you look at lifespan, human lifespan, it's increased to a degree over the last few decades, but it's beginning to decrease. But what is really changing is health span. So the number of years that an individual remains healthy. And we are really the only species on the planet that is now quite commonly spending the last 1/3 of our entire lifespan in not just a morbid state, but often a comorbid state where we have, two or more different comorbidities concurrently, all of them that have a common soil that, Richard, better than most, is related to excessive inflammation, excessive oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, immune suppression, etc. So we need to find the systems that handle that terrain, that allow us to be more resilient in the face of this anthropogenic environment that we live in. We need to help people to understand that it's not just the food that you eat, it's when and how you eat that is critical. It's when and how you exercise or take physical activity that is critical. It's how you respond to different stresses that is critical. This is all part of the healthcare equation that doesn't fit neatly into what I might call modality-based medicine, whether it's mainstream modality or whether it's an alternative modality. The things we've just been talking about, some of them encompass nutritional medicine, some of them encompass lifestyle medicine, some of them encompass, homeopathy actually is one of the disciplines that tends to be really understanding of the energetic environment that we live in. Spiritual healers exist only in that environment, but they may not, necessarily involve themselves in some of these others. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's as I see I really think that until we have a system where more people are exposed to generalist, what Rangan Chatterjee usefully described. He said the GP should become a specialist generalist. But I would apply it much more widely, that these specialist generalists should have a deep understanding of this ecological relationship that we are engaged with as organisms living in this partially natural, partially synthetic environment. And then we can start to make steps. And we got to address healthcare throughout someone's life and not wait for the system to collapse and break and pathogenesis to emerge. We've got to get there. We've got to maintain health and restore health, even when we see we've got so many different systems we can use that look for specific biomarkers or traits for dysfunctions in the system prior to pathogenesis occurring. Let's use it. Let's use it before the system breaks. It becomes cheaper, it becomes more effective, and it massively improves quality of life.
Yeah. I think you summed that up very, very nicely, and I appreciate that. So, in closing, if you could give one main advice to, let's say, non-practitioners, and main advice to a practitioner that is looking to make changes, but doesn't quite know how, what would your recommendation be?
if there's one piece of advice, it would be let nature be your ultimate teacher. In nature, one of the reasons so many of the doomsday scenarios that were projected in the 1970s have failed, and more recent ones around climate change have failed, is because the biosphere has this phenomenal intelligence and ability to compensate for what we're doing to it all the time. So while there is an increasing view that some of the aspects of climate change that have been seen to be the biggest problem, particularly carbon dioxide emissions, have been shown to be massively over-exaggerated. The problem there is that there is definitely a major environmental problem going on at the moment. And that relates to, the destruction of forests, desertification, chemical pollution, EMF pollution, et cetera, et cetera. However, despite all of that, the planet is continuously trying its best to adapt to that. And that is involving this massive system of interaction between microbes. Here we are finally recognizing the microbes in the human gut are pretty important. The microbes in the oral cavity, the oral microbiome, are pretty important. And actually, there's only a tiny group of microbes that do harm. Same thing if you look at viruses. Viruses are agents for genetic transfer. That's what they do. There's a tiny proportion of viruses that do. There's only about 200 that have ever been associated with human diseases, and there are probably over 6 million that are recognized, most of them existing where? In the oceans where life began. So once we start to see human evolution and the origins of life from a broader perspective, we are able to start to change our perspective on how we should be doing healthcare and the systems that we need to engage. Resilience, we should be doing resilience building. That's what real healthcare is about. How do we become more resilient psychologically, physiologically, emotionally, physically, in every possible dimension? How do we become more resilient? That is the ultimate expression of health.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I just I really like how you encompass all that there, and I really hope that everybody that's listening to this really takes that to heart and even listen to it a second time, because everything we need to know is all in that statement there. So if somebody is looking to help to make changes, can you point them in a direction? Can they become a member of your organization anyway to get information or to help in the project? How would somebody
Yeah.
go
So
about
look,
doing that?
we have a huge amount of information on the Alliance for Natural Health website. So the international website is at anhinternational.org. I won't tell you what we will be changing the URL as we bring our European, UK, and US group together on a single website. It'll become theanh.org, but that for another day because it'll all be bounced back. Currently, it's anhinternational.org. So we've got a lot more on international, a lot more on the health regeneration piece, looking at agricultural systems, food systems, the politics of healthcare, censorship, regulation. In the US, we've got less on that, but much more on the political scheme. Now, one of the reasons for the differences between the way we work in the US compared with in Europe and internationally is in the US, you've got such a developed integrative health system that does a lot of that work already. But we're just about to establish a practitioner, an ANH practitioner circle. We already have a corporate leadership circle in the United States. So the website there is ANH dash or hyphen USA.org, ANH hyphen USA.org. And the international one is anhinternational.org. You can sign up to both websites free of charge and get weekly newsletters. You can also use the search terms. You can go into the campaign areas. really education is a critical part of our work, but advocacy, um, uh, litigation, even in the US, we're involved in an awful lot of litigation as we attempt to sort of shift the whole regulatory environment that has been built by big food, big pharma to control its empires. And that now we have an opportunity for seismic change, and we're absolutely going at it hammer and tong. Um, with our general counsel, whose nickname is the FDA Dragon Slayer, because he has more successful wins against the FDA than any other attorney in history. So Jonathan Emord is his name. If you want to read some of his stuff, the book that he wrote in 2021 called The Authoritarians is a phenomenal history of the US to help people to understand how the administrative state. Everyone believes the US is the freest country in the world, and that it has this fantastic democratic system, but 75% of all regulatory decisions are made by the administrative state, by the agencies, without any input from Congress, the democratic instrument. And in Europe, it's even worse. So you essentially think that you're living in a democratic system when in fact there's almost no, it's lip service to democracy. It's not real democracy at all. In the US, we've got the Constitution that allows us the powers, for example, under the First Amendment in particular, to allow health information to be communicated, truthful health information to be communicated to people. That is the mechanism we're using to deal with censorship. Control over information is one of the most powerful mechanisms that is used by big food and big pharma and their tentacles that reach deep into pretty much every system on the planet. That's how they go about their control. And they do it through social media. They do it through the newspapers. They do it through, the way in which they control algorithms in social media. So that's called shadow banning. So it works at so many different levels. But we've got to remember that our perspective on reality, there is no such thing as one reality. The reality that we sense is one that is the result of our own experiences and the information that has programmed us. We are all programmed genetically and psychologically from prior to birth, and that's the reality that we believe in. And one of the reasons that we have so much conflict in the world today is that there are so many people being programmed in different ways. They cannot any longer see eye to eye. They also live in a state of fear, which pushes us back into our midbrain, disconnects us from the prefrontal cortex where we do all the reasoning and the rationalization. And we can't reason with each other anymore. And we decide we're going to either attack each other or censor someone or blow someone up, as we're seeing in Iran at the moment. And it's a very primitive way. We call ourselves an advanced civilization, but this is seriously primitive behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like we said, we think we're so advanced, but if we were in a looking glass, looking at everything that's going on here, we go, "What the heck is going on?" Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and we deserve to do as much as we can for the sake of our children and our children's children. It is our responsibility to make sure we push that pendulum back in the right direction.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that's the big thing. And once we take that back and under control, things will change. And I know as a parent, and when you have children, you think about things differently, and you want what's best for them. And when you see everything going on there, you're going, I don't want my child growing up in this mess. So what can we do? And I think you've given us some good things to consider. I really appreciate your philosophy, and it mirrors a lot of mine as well. So I think that's fantastic, and I really hope that people take this to heart. And by all means, I encourage the listeners to look up your your organization and sign up for the newsletters. I know I belong to it as well. And I haven't been able to get to a live event, but I got the recordings. And I think that's a great thing. And what we'll do, Rob, is we'll put that in the show notes for people as well, so that they can get that. And if there are any updates to those addresses, like you said, we can update that down the road as well. So, yeah. So again, I'd like to really thank you for your time, Dr. Rob. I really appreciate it. And for all the listeners there, please like and share this. If we're going to spread the word, we also need to spread the word. So please do that as well. Check out Dr. Rob's organizations, be a part of it, be a part of the change, and together we can do great things. So thank you again, Dr. Rob, and hopefully we'll have a time to chat with you again.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's been a delight talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the Integrative Continuum. I hope today's conversation gave you new insights and practical tools for your own health journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with someone who would benefit, and leave us a review. It helps us spread this message further. Until next time, I'm Dr. Richard Rocker. Stay curious, stay empowered, and keep moving forward on your path to integrative health.